Yeah, we're missing two folks. Fred, I'm not sure how much Fred has been able to hear the conversation. We're check
Can
in
you hear
on
us, Fred?
Yeah, pretty much.
You want to chime in on, Joe's asking if you want to chime in on this issue of budgeting from the general fund to cover some portion to subsidize the garbage contract.
Yeah, it might be a good idea, we could do that.
I mean, it doesn't hurt for you to present the options to
Here,
it.
I don't have a problem. Me personally, it's a use tax. We have to pay this municipality for the use. And it's not, we didn't do anything, that's what the costs are. We've always passed along to the residents since when we're 1990s, early 90s.
I mean, the pool's a use tax too,
Yeah.
that way,
I have no
we
problem.
haven't raised that.
Well, if you present, so I guess, so if you present it as options, we could still take action, right?
Well,
Next meeting or no?
the option is going to be a spreadsheet with 2 lines on it. Here's the cost, here's the projected revenue, here's the subsidy from the general fund. You guys have to fill in the cost. You tell me, I mean, what, you want to
Putting
try,
the blanks in the agenda.
right, are you trying to hold it at the old cost? Are you trying to split the difference? Or, you know, I mean, that discussion we could have now, I think would be that much further along if you're, okay, I mean, I know some people aren't here, but at least lay some groundwork so that we come in 2 weeks and have something to go, and otherwise we're just gonna sit there with some blanks on a page.
Yeah, so I think that color is actually gonna get filled out more at the next budget meeting, right? Because in each one of these budget meetings, right, we walk in with a balanced budget, right? And then we send you off and say, hey, here's our priorities, here's what we wanna do, right? And you're pulling from one and putting it in another, right? But I think the idea is that you were still gonna come back with a balanced budget,
Right.
you know? So at the next meeting, if we have a balanced budget, and we understand what all our priorities are, we kinda need to know then, well, how much are we, because it's gonna come out of it's gonna come just out of the carryover,
Yeah.
you know?
Right, so where you are now is, you know, you have a fund balance of about 1.2. We're gonna, to keep the budget balanced and to continue to fund the Clearview project, we'll take Clearview out of that fund balance. However, $1 million fund balance is a good and recommended fund balance for the borough. So every dollar we spend to subsidize garbage out of that is gonna take us below $1 million, and that's a policy decision, not a
Yeah.
budgeting decision. You guys tell me.
Right.
I'm recommending that you keep at least $1 million in a fund balance, and I'm recommending that it's a user fee and that cost be passed through.
Right, and right, so to follow up what he said, so if we're at 1.2 million, he's also suggesting that we continue with the Clearview project, which is around 275,000. That is coming out of the fund balance. So we're going down from 1.2 to just around 1, right?
Which
And
is where you should be.
and anything further, right, is below that, right? So, you know, I guess if we wanted to subsidize this, I mean, just to put rough numbers into it, right? If it's a roughly 30% increase, right, and we wanted to fund this and keep it at current levels, right? It's 30% of $500,000. So that's 150. So we're talking about it subsidizing anything from 0 up to 150, all of which would come out of the fund balance. What number do we really want to think about plugging in there, if any?
Well, 2,615 units. We're going from $12 a unit, is that right, for the 15, or for this year to 14?
That was the old, that was the number for the new contract. I don't have it.
Okay, so if it's 12 to 1371, it would be, say, $2 per month per unit, which would be roughly 5,200 times 12 months, which is going to be about $60,000, would be the increase for the year. So we would have to look at it that way.
So you're saying it would go from 0 to 60 versus 0 to...
Well, what I'm saying is it would take us roughly about $60,000 to keep the garbage fee
Same price.
at the same price. So if you're going from roughly, I think you said $12 a month,
I think so, yeah.
to $13.71, that's $1.71
No,
per
that's
year.
garbage only, you don't have to put no recycle in there?
Yeah, so that's even higher than that.
Oh, okay, so I didn't get
Yeah,
this.
Yeah.
the current number,
1591.
So it's $15.91, so you're going $3.91, which means $4, that's 10 grand times, that's 120,000.
Yeah, so mine 150, I mean, I was using rough numbers, a third, right? So I think it is, it's closer to 120,
Yeah,
Yeah.
120,000.
yeah.
So do you wanna take 120,000, you wanna take 60 out, do you wanna just pass it on to consumers? You know, the other thing is the capital projects. I'm big into the capital projects because we can't just keep taking money and dumping it into, we've gotta start fixing infrastructures from here to the future, and you guys have did some of that already. We've gotta continue on with that. So at what level are we going to start cutting the capital stuff to help with the budget, or help with the garbage?
Yeah.
You know, it's all tied in, and I don't know if we even have an answer, we'll be able to come to an answer tonight. I think it's, you know,
I think
good.
we owe it to the citizens to discuss it though.
Yeah, absolutely, but I don't know, sitting here tonight, if we have all the information to make that decision. I think maybe it probably would have to be pushed back to December meeting.
Well, I'm confused, so what don't we have, right? If we
I
subsidize
don't
this,
have
we could
enough food
subsidize
for
it.
thought to sit here and make decisions for the residents without processing all this information.
I have a spreadsheet that shows all the
My,
numbers.
my,
for the last,
big-
like,
right now, I would say just pass it on to consumers. That would be my thought, if push came to shove tonight. But if there's another equitable way that we could sit and try to get this without losing capital projects and stuff like that, I may be interested in that. But I don't have that information tonight. He'd probably have to develop and see exactly what it's going to cost.
We got spreadsheets coming out of our ears. I mean, there's trending information from the last 10 years that I can email to everybody, you can look at.
Yeah, I mean, having gone through the last couple of budget meetings, we're pulling capital projects out of those budget
Yeah,
meetings,
I'm not-
right? We're losing capital projects, right? Right, where we stand now, we're not even funding the pool project, right? We had hoped to have a bigger pool project, now we're matching, grant against grant because we can't come up with any money for that. We were gonna drop the Clearview project, now it's been suggested to bring it back in. But, I mean, I think I don't know, it feels to me like we probably would have more capital projects than we can afford right now. And any subsidizing of this draws from that, right? I mean, it makes that even worse, or it makes our fund balance worse.
Right.
It saves a little bit on the impact of I guess, the pockets of the citizens, sure. But this is also going to increase every year, right? Are we gonna keep the same subsidy every year, right? That just progressively gets worse. Eventually, we're gonna even be less capital project funding, I don't know. But I guess when we talked about the more information, we're at 0 to 120. Between now and 2 meetings from now, it's still gonna be 0 to 120, and it's still gonna come out of the reserve budget, right? Those aren't gonna change between now and the next 2 weeks.
What's it going to affect in that budget? That was my question. Without looking at the budget and what projects are in that budget, where's that money going to come out, and what projects would be cut? I see what you're saying.
I think
But we're not cutting any projects, we're just taking the money out of what we have in a piggy bank, and we're just going to put it towards garbage.
that's what it seems
Okay.
like to me, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, well,
And I mean, the only feedback I would have, right, is that, if somebody wanted to get feedback from citizens, right, should we or should we not do that? Do we wanna, is that what the community would want us to do, or is that not what the community would want us to do? And I guess we can reach out and try to get some of that information, but otherwise, if we don't get that, right, if you don't get it, I don't get it, you don't get, we're gonna be right back here 2 weeks from now, and it's gonna be plug in 0, plug in 10,000, plug in 100,000, plug in 120,000, right, but it's all coming from the piggy bank.
Okay. I think we're good there.
Okay. The next discussion item.
I'm sorry, I'm not good. So what am I doing? What am I preparing for the next?
I would,
meeting?
personally, I would like you to prepare with e-waste, with alleys. Pass it on to the consumer, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think we'll have another discussion, when we have a full council present. Hopefully there'll be, the other folks that we need here will be here. But we've told them that in our discussion today, we're in support of keeping the alleys for the reasons we discussed, that we are not gonna be making material improvements in the alleys. It's a stopgap solution until we can. So leave it with the alleys. refer to the environment, more e-waste happening. It's much more convenient to leave it at your curb instead of it getting thrown off of the hill. Not everyone can make the Dan Deasy event. So we're taking on those 2 increases, and the discussion that we'll have as a council in the next 2 weeks is really more around, do we want to subsidize this with the fund balance? Yes or no? And to what extent do we do want to do that? And then we'll plug in that number for John. When we have that number, 0 to 120, then we make a motion, and you vote on that motion. Take action with the garbage. Okay, next budget, next discussion item under administration is auditor proposals. We're looking to take action at the 24th meeting. So to bring everyone up to speed on this again, right? We changed auditors this year. That auditor did not move in a very timely fashion. We went to Plan B, which was to go back to the original auditor. That auditor was willing to do the price at the same price the second, or the first, who we moved to was going to do it at. So that was good. But the reason why we moved from the first auditor to the second in the first place was feedback to us that every 3 to 5 years you should switch auditors, get a new eyes on the books, right? Have a different perspective on it. Did we complete the audit this year? Is it still ongoing?
The DCED paperwork was filed, I haven't gotten word the other component is done.
Financial statements,
Yeah.
almost.
All right, so we're almost done with that.
Hopefully it's done by this year, 2022.
Right. But the point is that the audit should be completed by April of next year, right? Or, April, what will be in 2015. We're here in November, just still trying to get it done. So we've got to take action relatively soon to select a new auditor so that we can get back on that proper timeframe.
So we've had 2 auditors and 2 auditors couldn't bring it in. We switched over to 1 auditor because there were bank accounts not in the actual
They weren't
audit.
made aware of that account that you're questioning. That's why they didn't do anything. There was nothing wrong with the auditor, it's just it was never brought to their
To
attention.
have an audit without a bank account on the audit.
It's never
is
brought
not
to the
fully
auditor as
audit.
borough account though, so they didn't have it in front of them to audit.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a couple schools of thought there, right? The auditor missed it, right? But we hand over our books to be audited, and there was something missing in those books, and it didn't get audited, as it was explained to me. Now, whose fault is that, right? Is it the fault of the person handing over the books that you left one out? Or is it the person who's receiving those books to have known that that should have been there, right? That was one, I think some folks feel like that we moved auditors simply for that reason, right? I think that was part of it. I think the other part of it was, it's just a good practice to move auditors every 3 or 5 years, right? So we did, and then backtrack, right? That guy, the second auditor, didn't do anything. Delay, didn't get it done, and now we're late. And we went and said, how can we get it done? The easiest path to get it done then was back to the original guy. And it's almost done. So, clean slate for next year, right? We said, put it out for bid. Who can audit these books, right? All the books, all the ones we should be handing over. We've got proposals in.
How do we ensure we hand them all over? Like, who watches that?
Borough manager. Treasurer.
Well, your treasurer's report lists all the accounts. Craft and Celebration's never listed as a borough account, so obviously, if the auditor's looking at that list, they don't see it's
See the borough, yeah.
And if the office and others weren't aware that it should have been included as a borough account, that it wasn't like a
Right.
subsidiary, a volunteer organization's account, they didn't know to turn it over, so it really wasn't anybody's fault, it was just an oversight. Some felt it should, some felt it shouldn't, and it just got.
That's,
slipped through the
okay,
cracks.
that's over in my,
Right.
let's move on.
It was put in last year, it was audited again this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's,
If you look at the list of the treasurer's reports, all the accounts are on there. There's no hidden accounts, there's nothing.
and going through, I mean, I think we get better at this because at the last budget meeting, right, that Deb was here, and she highlighted a number of accounts that we shouldn't have, which makes this even more complicated, right? So she was suggesting, more proper ways of handling this, roll these accounts back into the general fund, right? The ones that we don't need, the nickel and dime accounts that were created for some purpose, never really served that purpose. Money's been sitting in these funds for years, never been dispersed out of those funds. So she's actually helping us get to more better practices. So I think the trust of those better practices, plus a new auditor, handing over all the books, right? We should be in a better spot next year. But we have to pick someone.
Well, isn't that what we have, John? And
Well, John and Deb are cleaning some of that up, right? And minimally, right, we won't make the same mistake we made last time, right? Which was not handing over celebrates, because that's one of the accounts that's still gonna stick around, right? But now it's in a borough account, it will get handed over, it will get audited. But, back to selecting the auditor. I think that the key point here is that we gotta review these proposals, and we've gotta select one timely, so that we aren't as late as we were last year. And also, I think we need to do a better job of, when we say the audit's gonna start, well, then the audit should start at that time, right? It felt to me like, well, the audit was supposed to start with a new auditor, and 3 months later, we're still scratching our heads like, why didn't it start? We can't wait 3 months or 4 months wondering why it didn't start and taking excuses as to why it didn't start. So select one, pick a day to start it, and make sure it starts on that day.
That's never been an issue until this last auditor, never been an issue. It's always been filed by April 1st.
So, do you have a recommendation, having reviewed the auditor proposals?
We just got them on Friday, and so we have 5 proposals, and what I'd recommend is that Debbie and I review it with yourself and the finance chair via email this week. We'll make a recommendation for you to consider next week. I think our recommendation should hold some weight in terms of our familiarity with the books, and probably want to pick someone new, that doesn't have any history with the borough at all. So that'll be a factor.
Sounds good.
Okay, everyone okay with that approach?
And it does have to be done the next meeting, 30 days prior to the end of the fiscal year.
We'll make a decision at the next meeting, provided that we get the recommendation from the borough manager.
We will make a recommendation. Deb and I will email the council president and the finance chair with the recommendation, and if you have any questions, we can answer those and have that discussion
who's
at
the
the next
finance
meeting.
Mr. Phillips,
Oh, Can I get part of that, because I want to reread after you make a
Send it
determination?
to all council.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that
They're,
would be great.
they're all posted to Cubby, all the
Yeah, proposals, whatever your recommendation,
Oh,
is, CC all council, so I can at least take a look at it.
no problems there.
As long as you don't have a conversation via email.
No, we're,
No, yeah.
I understand that.
Okay, moving on. Solicitor proposals. You want to give us a rundown of what we found there, John?
Well, we got a bunch. I need some guidance on how you want to proceed, what the timeline is, or what you'd like it to be. We've got several proposals, all
How many did we get?
from good firms.
13.
Yeah, I was gonna say 11 or 12, yeah.
I would request that we do a pricing grid. Some of them came in hourly, some of them came in
Sure.
flat, annual plus hourly. If we could normalize that, so we're comparing apples to apples.
Okay. Do you have a time frame you'd like to make some selection? Do you want to have a selection committee or an established committee?
I mean, my time frame would be, when new people step in, right? It always happens in January. And Fred raised this at the beginning of January, where we were kind of keeping all our professional services people consistent from year over year, right? And it was raised that, hey, the solicitor was one of those, and everyone was. The road engineer and what have you, the labor attorney. I'd like to, at the beginning of next year, make a decision around who we're going to stay with. And we've asked Mr. Ayub to be part of that. He's one of the 11 or 12 bids. So we're not going to move away just for the sake of moving away. I don't believe that by the same token you get a better set of eyes on your books, that makes sense every 3 to 5 years. That's not necessarily true with your attorney, right? We may want to keep Mr. Ayub. It may make financial sense. It may be the comfort level with what's happened with the borough over his tenure with the borough makes sense. So this isn't a mandatory move, but I want to make sure that this particular council does vote on who they would like to serve the council for at least the next year or years to come. So to that end, right, I would like to vote at the voting meeting in January to make that decision. And help us connect the dots between now and then, because I think if we whittle this down after a financial review, we're going to want to interview these folks, right? I don't feel like we don't have to interview the auditor, right? We're not going to do that, but we would want to interview our solicitor, right? So walk us back from what a timeline looks like to make a decision at the voting meeting in January.
Sure, so we have 10, I just put up on Cubby, we've got 10 submittals. First question is, I'd like some guidance on how you'd like to narrow it down to, say, 2 or 3. I think, and then conduct interviews. With respect to a financial analysis, I would advise that not drive the decision. This is not, we're not buying widgets, you're buying a professional service, right? So I can make you a spreadsheet that'll show hourly rates. And the reality is, it's all gonna total up to whatever you needed at the end of the year. It's not like, you know, you're, like I said, you're not buying a certain number of widgets every year. You're gonna buy a certain number of hours, you need an expert advice on a particular issue over the year, you need somebody to come to the meetings over the year. So I'll pull together a spreadsheet, but at the end of the day, I think the interview process will be important here. So I'd like to know how you'd like to narrow it down and who you would like to sit in on the interviews for that position.
Thoughts?
Personally, I like most of those were full service firms, so I think full service.
Okay.
I'm not, if you need something from some of those firms, if you need something for labor, a lot of those firms have labor. We need something on construction, some of those firms have somebody to deal with construction. We need somebody on municipal or taxation or bonds. You know, some of those bigger firms have that expertise within that firm. Some of the little firms, I don't know how many of them, I read through most of those, are almost like mom and pop kind of things, a couple attorneys that are all everything. You know what I mean?
Now, to be fair to the folks that submitted though, our proposal, our RFP did not include labor or bond counsel. So that would, what you just said will almost with certainty disqualify half, if not.
Well, I have no problem with that, but I'm thinking that it's always nicer to have everything within one firm. Now, and I wasn't here for that, but that's my opinion. It's always nicer to have everything within, so everybody knows what's going on, the workings, the functions. Hey, this is how it's going. Once you call from one attorney to the other attorney, you know what happens. So, you know, from point A to B, or both cash registers are rolling.
Well, I mean, in the past, right, I mean, our recent past, that break between labor and general, right, our solicitor has been all general items counsel, and for our labor, it's just been about labor,
Right.
right? And our solicitor has deferred to the laborer, and the laborer has deferred to the solicitor back and forth, and I don't feel like that's been broken, right? We don't get double billed, if you will. It's not like one is charging the other one to tell him what happened or what's been decided, so that's actually not been, you know, that hasn't been bad, you know? And we could also still visit the labor if we want to switch labor attorney, or we could, like John said, look at the folks in this current round who did it. But we didn't, when we put it out for bid, we weren't looking for specialization.
And I'm not saying that we have to change labor. I'm just saying that I like that concept of a firm, that you're in with on one firm, and I can't remember some of the names. There was Babs Cowan, a lot of the people in the East. Cam Best group was in there, Gatens was in there, Tesoro, Tucker was in there. There was a bunch of different firms. Tom was in there, but I don't think Tom was comfortable with labor, that's why we had labor.
Right, a lot of solicitors aren't.
Yeah.
It's typical that it would be separate.
That's my opinion.
So I could do a chart that would show the services that they provide in-house, type of legal services they provide in-house.
I think billing is good
The hourly
too, because
rate.
you may get somebody comes out to $170 an hour. I didn't really look at that, to be honest with you. I read mostly the resumes, not what they were charging us. So, but it would be good to find out who's charging what. And you can match expertise up with cost. If you're getting the greatest municipal attorney at a higher cost, maybe that's what we want. You know.
All right, so besides the financial breakdown, to April's point, and looking at how the breadth of the firm, what are the parameters might we want to use to help decide?
Your Martin Huffledale rating.
What was that, Fred?
Your Martin Huffledale rating.
Okay.
I've read every proposal that we got from all the attorneys. Can you hear me all right?
Yep,
Yeah.
we hear you.
And I think, in my opinion, there are a couple that are too big, and there are a couple that are too small. The in-between one seemed very interesting. But, some have submitted their proposals with their Martin Hubbledell rating. Some have submitted proposals that, lean their Hubbledell rating is for their whole, law firm, when it's really not. It's only for the individual attorney. So I think that might be an important piece we might want to look at.
Okay, so far I have
Did you ask
services.
for that in the proposal?
The rating? No. We have services offered, hourly rate, the rating, if they provided it, and the size of their firm.
I think that's good.
Yeah, well, in their proposals, we can clearly see the size of the firm. And, as I said, I thought some were too big and we would get lost in the shuffle. I thought some were too small and didn't have the expertise for what they have to do. I only see 3 or 4 that really jump out.
Okay, so I'll put together a spreadsheet with that information in it and circulate to council. What would you like the step to be in terms of reviewing that spreadsheet and narrowing it down to those to be interviewed?
Put on that
Well,
call.
does the president want to appoint a committee to study it?
Yeah, I think what we should do is, let's create a committee. Let's create a committee and get it down to 3 or 4. And the 3 or 4 firms, then we'll open up to interviews, right? All council can be present for the interviews. And then we'll make a decision there. I know one of the things I was gonna say as we're going through the parameters, one of the things most important to me, and I don't know if this is something, John, you'd recommend during the interview process or to get it down from 3 or 4. I really wanna speak to other councils that have these firms and what kind of, what's the, how do they communicate their advice to them, right? Is it direct? Is it, more are they just telling you what the law is and you decide, right? Because we've had, that's been one of my struggles, right, within our situation now. So I want to be able to speak directly to someone that's using these firms and see what their level of interaction is and how they work with the council. I could do that after we've whittled it down to 3 or 4, or if we could do it at all 12, right? If you tell me what you think is most.
12's too kind time.
Yeah, that's a lot of phone calls. I'd recommend, based on these criteria, if you have the committee narrow it down to 3 or 4, and then you get that additional information
Okay.
for those 3 or 4.
Okay, so, I'd hate to make a committee now when we're missing 2 folks, right? Because they may want to actually participate on the committee. So, can you pull that stuff together and we'll make the committee selection
meeting?
at next meeting?
Sure.
And then we'll take that approach. We'll, if we want to keep the committee, below a number where we don't have to obviously advertise to meet. So that's 3 or less, right? So can't all be on it. So think about whether or not this is something you want to partake in, and then I'll make the decision on who the 3 folks are at the next meeting. Okay. Next item, zoning hearing board, building appeals board, seat expires 12/31/14. Is it 1 seat?
There's one on the zoning hearing board, that's Steve Kachowski, and then Michael Magliocco, on the building appeals board.
They asked to stay.
Well, what we normally do is we post it on the website, these positions are open. But we also do ask the same people if they're interested in reapplying, reappointing.
I know that the building appeals board's tough, because you have to meet certain requirements. So that was a tough one. Zoning hearing board, there's really no
I don't
requirement.
think, in the whole time we've had this board, I don't
I think
think
they've
we've ever
ever
met
met
one time.
one.
Well, yeah, just to reemphasize, right, this council has beat each other up a lot about this, right? Open it up for volunteers, right? We have to advertise, right? It feels like sometimes these committees just move on from one to the next to the next. Once you're in, you're always in, right? This council, and not you just got here, Mike, but council before you, we're adamant about not doing that. Open it up, right? More volunteers, more involvement is better. So let's advertise. Let's also ask if these folks wish to continue, and let's put a deadline on of people soliciting a interest.
When you say advertise, You can
On the website.
formally?
I mean, on the website. Website, word of mouth, right, get it out there that, you know, this is available, and
We
we're,
have that new thing that we can send you.
Black or black, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why we don't use that.
yeah, I'm not talking about paper, right?
No, I mean,
The paper's
we
not the
throw
way
it on
to,
black.
There's not that many people signed up for it, so not that many people.
Well, just send it out, maybe.
yeah, send it.
Send it.
I mean,
We
even-
only have the one meeting in December, the 8th, so we want it like a few days before that, and then have that information for appointment, and